Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. Welcome to the Kaiser Report. Monsanto. Monsatan. Evil genius or Frankenfood? Stacy?
Max Kaiser, Monsanto is in the news. There's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. About this case, the automaticearth.com says, time to stop Monsanto and the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the case is called Bowman versus Monsanto Company, and it's case number 11-796. And the New York Times, in their piece about this, and this is setting up the automaticearth.com writing about it, the Supreme Court appears to defend patent on soybean. The question in the case, Bowman versus Monsanto Company, number 11-796, was whether patent rights to seeds and other things that can replicate themselves extend beyond the first generation. The justices appeared alert to the consequences of their eventual ruling, not only for Monsanto's very lucrative soybean patents, but also for modern agriculture generally, and for areas as varied as vaccines, cell lines, and software.
Well, yeah, the patents for seeds that are owned by Monsanto are there for one purpose and one purpose only: to raise the cost of food. Just like you have central banks who are in the business of manipulating rates, interest rates, and money flows to raise the cost of agriculture in general for people by debasing currencies, there's Monsanto on the other side of this trade. They're the beneficiary of the debasement of currencies by monopolizing seed and cash crops and making it impossible for people to grow food and grow cash crops or agricultural products in ways that are economically efficient. So this is Monsanto adding to the gulagification of the global economy. I think they're the most hated company in the world. Maybe Exxon or Monsanto. Those are the two most hated companies. They do the most damage to the world. They're economically doing the most damage to the world, and they're run by people who are obviously in league with the devil.
Well, don't mention their name to a Vietnam vet, for example. I made the mistake of saying that name to my uncle who was in Vietnam. They don't like them. But, you know, before the Supreme Court in this case, the Supreme Court justices did seem very favorable to Monsanto. And why in the world, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. asked, would anybody spend any money to try to improve the seed if as soon as they sold the first one, anybody could grow more and have as many of those seeds as they want?
Right, and of course you mentioned the Vietnam War in reference to the Agent Orange that they use to defoliate, and that's the primary of their business is to destroy agriculture. And if they can do so by patenting seeds and by gaming the intellectual property laws, then so much better. And of course, the other magical thinking that goes into Monsanto's mind is that when the seeds blow around thanks to the wind and they land on people's property, they then sue people for having seeds on their property that are patented by Monsanto that the wind blew there. So effectively, Monsanto is suing God. Their position is that God is a moron, according to Monsanto, which I guess is in keeping in today's world of retiring popes and other things that are going on.
Well, the sheer fact is, by Chief Justice Roberts' argument, we humans would still be hunting, gathering. Why the hell would we even bother to plant seeds and cultivate and go through all that work if nobody was going to pay us to do it?
Right, because this is adding to the public domain. This is adding to the public's knowledge. This is adding to our experience as human beings. What Chief Justice Knucklehead is saying is that every time he farts, he wants to get paid for it because he owns the DNA of his fart.
The question in this case, this farmer, the 76-year-old farmer from Indiana, he's okay with the notion of copywriting life and copywriting genes. And now Monsanto basically owns the entire soybean supply in all of America. They have 93% of the market because they innovated a little tiny fragment of the gene. So essentially, they've been awarded the patent for all soybean seeds because they own the entire supply.
Right, and it's a vertical devastation in that they also sell fertilizers that only work with their patented products. They sell various other extensions and brand extensions and intellectual property extensions that only work with Monsanto's product. There's their hardcore monopoly, which drive prices up. In India, where Monsanto is active and they've manipulated and patented seeds, you've got something like 2,000 Indian farmers committing suicide It could be every week, a number of that high magnitude. And that'll be the case of farmers around the world if Monsanto has their way. I'm sure that Goldman Sachs will package suicide farmer collateralized debt obligations and make additional money on farmers killing themselves.
The Automatic Earth says for 10,000 to 20,000 years, people all over the world have been improving agricultural crops in multiple ways, changing plants from their wild origins to their present domesticated versions. One of the most important changes, obviously, has been to make it easier to save seeds and plant these in the new year for the next harvest. No mean feat. Monsanto now simply takes all of this away in just a few years' time, with impunity and with encouragement from the U.S. government and Supreme Court.
Right. I mean, it's important to keep in mind, look, they're not agricultural innovators. They're agricultural monopolists. That's a big difference. They're anti-competition. They're anti-agriculture. They're trying to turn seeds into a currency, and they want to monopolize that currency. And they're doing a great job doing it. And of course, the Supreme Court, which is now heavily favored toward corporations, will go along with this scheme. And the net result will be higher prices and starvation. And of course, because like Lloyd Blankfein and Goldman Sachs, they believe they're doing God's work, they'll look down from their mighty position of intellectual property, Mount Olympus, and just say, well, you died, you starved to death, you deserved it, and we're Monsanto, to hell with you.
To put that into context, this copyright and the control of the food system, a study by the Center for Food Safety found that 53% of the world's commercial seed market is controlled by just 3 firms, Monsanto, DuPont, and Syngenta.
Right, that's not competition. Anyone who argues on behalf of Monsanto is arguing against free markets. They're arguing against competition. They're arguing against agriculture as something that is to some degree human right. The people have been cultivating crops for thousands of years, and yet that embedded knowledge now is being decimated by predatory monopolists in the form of Monsanto for predatory profits, which they will use to influence Peddle in Washington to extend their monopoly in areas other than just agriculture, because of course they're in bed with that other sick wacko, Bill Gates, who's a huge investor in Monsanto. Look what he did with the software industry and Microsoft. He destroyed it.
Well, Microsoft is actually coming up in this next headline here because they're involved in this case. They've issued their own statements in support of Monsanto's position. But before we go on to that, I want to mention that the Automatic Earth asks, and if a farmer cannot own his seeds, what about his animals? Or what if Monsanto figures out a gene variation that limits your own personal risk of a disease, say cancer? Does it own you outright then? Or will it only give you the choice between becoming a debt slave or dying young?
Well, they argue for private property rights, and I would say that there's a difference between private property rights and monopolies. You know, you need monopolies, and free competition don't exist harmoniously. And this is a play for monopolizing this industry in a way that not only is anti-competitive, but it's anti-human. It's borderline eugenicism is what it is. You'd have to go back to experiments of eugenics to find something as abhorrent as a Monsanto and what they're doing with seeds.
So earlier you brought up Microsoft. So I want to get back to them because if Monsanto wins this in front of the Supreme Court, an important precedent has been set for other areas regarding copyright. This is from Bloomberg. Monsanto, JCPenney, Elsevier, intellectual property. And in this, they talk about the case before the Supreme Court, February 19th. The decision comes down in June. BSA, the software alliance, whose members include Apple and Microsoft, told the court that eliminating patent protection for self-replicating seeds could facilitate software piracy. Research universities and biotechnology companies say a victory by Bowman would harm their ability to license their work in cancer research, crop protection, and nutrition.
Well, the Supreme Court is shockingly on the side of eugenics in this case. DNA works by making a copy of itself. That is the fundamental basis of human life, of all life on this planet. Here you want Monsanto and Microsoft to say no to life. They want to own replication and to own the intellectual property for all copying down to the level of seeds and zygotes of human reproduction and the ability for cells to reproduce, to heal. If you get cut and your body starts to heal itself, Microsoft will say, well, we own the patent on the DNA that you're using against our patent to heal. You have to send us a check, and we'll release a version of the patent, but only if you agree with us politically. Only if you support our continuation to become fully integrated monopolies. If you don't, then you don't get the cure, and you're going to have to die.
Well, regarding this notion that they own the rights to life, finally on this story, the Automatic Earth sums up, our right to feed our children has been made subordinate to the right of chemical companies to change the very food we count on to keep our children fed. To top it all off, the modern food industry claims that it and it alone provides the necessary tools without which our children would go hungry. God's work indeed. Makes you wonder what keeps the devil occupied these days.
Well, they've succeeded in alienating people from themselves, and people are so confused they don't know anymore what they represent as human beings anymore. They're stressed out, they're on drugs, they're eating genetically modified food, they're dying, life expectancy is decreasing, and the Monsanto and Bill Gates are laughing all the way to the bank.
And now finally, regarding that Bloomberg headline, I mentioned Elsevier, and this is the company, of course, for which Aaron Swartz died because he was downloading those JSTOR documents. And Elsevier is one of these companies that hold all this intellectual property from various public entities, whether schools or court systems. So a federal judge in New York dismissed a copyright infringement case 2 attorneys brought against Newton, Massachusetts-based Reed Elsevier and West Publishing Corporation. Edward L. White of Oklahoma City and Kenneth Elan of New York sued in February 2012, claiming that the publication of their court filings in West Litigator and Elsevier's LexisNexis legal database infringed their copyrights. They objected to the commercial use of this. They were doing their job in court. Reed Elsevier was taking their content and selling it, putting it behind a copyright wall, even though the federal courts are financed by we the people, and they make a profit from it, and the courts decided in, of course, the favor of the major corporation.
Time for another Nuremberg. Put them up there, Bill Gates and Monsanto. Open up the trap door. All right, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away, much more coming your way, so stay right there. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Washington, D.C. and speak with Eric Hilton of Thievery Corporation, a Washington, D.C.-based recording artist and DJ duo. Eric reached out to Kaiser Report. He claims it's his favorite show to debate my position on copyright and file sharing. Eric, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Thanks, Max. Nice to be here.
All right, Eric Hilton, you wrote to me to tell me you were against my position on copyright. So tell us about your position on copyright and called illegal downloading, or as some are calling it file sharing. What is your position?
Well, my position is that, file sharing is here to stay, and people are going to file share, but there's a lot of money being made off file sharing. And like the Who said, same as meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The ISPs and Google and YouTube are the ones making all the money on the file sharing. And the artists are really suffering right now, and I don't think that music is free. I think that more money may be made off music now than ever before, but it's being made by the ISPs, Google, YouTube. And I think that, the 1% is just getting richer. And the 1% now is this sort of techno-feudalistic system that's basically making money off free music.
Okay, well, at the root of this file sharing debate, it goes back to copyright and copyright law. And there are those who believe that there should not be any copyright law at all. There are those that believe there should be a much more limited copyright law, perhaps 14 years or 28 years as it was originally written in the American Constitution. And then, of course, you have copyright as it's interpreted by corporations like Disney, which is lifetime plus 75 years of copyright protection. Where do you fall in terms of copyright law? What do you believe should be the correct law for copyright?
I think you'd be surprised that our views on copyright are fairly similar. I think there should be limited copyright, probably the original statute in the Constitution. I think the Disney ruling was pretty ridiculous. You shouldn't have lifetime plus 70 years. Copyright is important. I do believe there is copyright. I mean, even Noam Chomsky copyrights his material. Many people believe in copyright, but it can be very oppressive. And I don't agree with the Disney decision at all.
Right. So we have some common ground here in terms of copyright, as it's currently iterated, is what Lawrence Lessig would call perpetual copyright, and it's extremely damaging to artists because what happens is that ideas end up being perpetually locked up behind corporate firewalls, and this isn't doing anybody any good. So, I mean, it seems as though we agree on that part of this debate.
Well, I absolutely agree, but I think that artists sometimes make very foolish decisions, like signing to a major label. Like, one of the reasons we call ourselves Thievery Corporation is that we're a DIY company. We never signed to a major label. We own our copyrights. We set up our own distribution networks, and we financed everything. We bootstrapped it and financed everything for ourselves. We never sold our souls to any major label or any large corporation. We're sort of a mom and pop, four-man operation with an engineer, and we pay health care and salaries, so we're definitely not the enemy. We're not Warner Brothers. We're not one of the big major labels trying to restrict copyright for, perpetuity.
Okay, now in your email to me, you mentioned the Ramones. You say, well, the Ramones would never have happened had they tried to start their band in a post-BitTorrent era. Now, to this, someone on our site named Bill asked the question, well, what about all the talented musicians that we never heard of because they couldn't make it through the old music system? So there's a bit of a quid, it goes both ways there. Your thoughts?
Well, it's true. The old music system was very corrupt. So I actually agree with you that I'm not a big fan of the major labels, obviously, but a band like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols or the Clash or any of these bands, Public Enemy, that we love and adore, or at least I do, they needed the support of the label because basically they would tour at a loss, because most bands even today tour at a loss, and they tour so that they can generate sales of their records. But if there are no sales, you can't tour, so you can't even get off the ground. It's kind of like a plane that can't gain altitude. And I know that the Ramones signed to Sire Records in the late 70s, and Sire put a lot of money behind them to tour, and they toured, and then they sold records, and then they recouped that money, and I hope they made some money. When you sign to a major label, that's a crapshoot. I would never do it, but you really can't get off the ground without some sort of tour support. It's really expensive to tour.
Now, of course, going back 30 or 40 years, we gave music away free on something called the radio, and played by disc jockeys, and you can hear it in your car for free, and then you went out and you bought a record of that song. Now we've got digital replication of these tunes. People can buy iTunes. They're bypassing that completely. They're just downloading music for free. But the economics are that you still have the ability to get new acts out there on a relatively cheap basis who are then touring and getting their music heard. And a lot of musicians are making a living that would not have made a living before at all.
I don't know. I agree with you with the radio, but when you get music played on radio, ASCAP or BMI actually collects some sort of performance royalty, and you actually get paid. But on the internet, that's not really the case. And you look at companies like, here we have big ISPs in Washington. Everyone has giant ISPs. You have Google. They're making hand over fist money, but there's really no royalty for the artist. So the real content on the internet, you look at a site like Pirate Bay, which, I think that was a brilliant idea, but really Pirate Bay and the torrent sites are trading mostly in creative content. Like something like 99% or a very large portion of that content is film and music, and there is really no royalty structure. So, essentially artists are in this sort of surf-like, lifestyle right now. And at least the radio generates some royalty for the artist, but the internet isn't generating any royalty for the artist.
All right, let's talk about another entrepreneur, Kim.com in New Zealand. He will soon launch his service called Megabox. Now, this is a site for artists to upload their content. They will keep 90% of all revenues earned. His site, Mega Upload, at one point, he had 5% of the global traffic. He was considered to be a threat to the RIAA and the MPAA, and they took his site down. But he's coming back with Mega Box. The model is artists keep 90% of any revenues earned. Your thoughts?
I think it's a great idea. He also sold a lot of ad revenue, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if he shared any of that ad revenue with the artists. And I'm not really familiar with any quote-unquote copyright infringement, but any new paradigm is very welcome to me and other artists. We don't see technology as the enemy. We see technology as a solution. Right now, we're on the wrong side of it. I do think that we're being exploited by the ISPs and the search engines, but I do think that technology will be the solution. So I'm very open to ideas like that.
Now, let's talk a minute about the Recording Industry Association of America, the RIAA. It's a vengeful lobbyist for big music. Your thoughts on their actions and similar intellectual property lobbying groups that have passed 3 strikes laws around the world. So the RIAA, they are extremely aggressive. They sue their customers. They supposedly represent you, the artist. What are your thoughts on what they're doing?
Well, they don't represent me because they represent the major labels, and so certainly they don't represent the artists. I'm not sure the major labels even represent the artists. And I'm also very embarrassed to have the backdrop of the White House behind me right now because I'm not speaking in any official position. I'm not a fan of the RIAA. I very much disagree with their attempts at prosecuting individual downloaders. I see that as something akin to the drug war, where you go out and you arrest the kid with a small bag of weed, but you don't bust the dealer. I mean, they're really attacking the wrong people, and their tactics are wrong, and I don't agree with them.
So Eric Hilton, is Thievery Corporation, is Eric Hilton taking a political position against onerous copyright law?
I guess I am, Max. Maybe you've won me over.
Okay. Fair enough. But I think what we do, we agree in that there's room for a copyright monopoly protection for a limited time, possibly as it was structured in the Constitution of the United States anyway, is 28 years. But let's talk a little bit about the fact about these business models, because you've suggested that new technology could be the solution. New business models could be, and the Kim.com's model looks like it's going to be a big winner for him. But nevertheless, what about the studies that show that downloaders of free stuff actually end up spending more on content more than other people do? Now, this was demonstrated in France when the Hadopi 3 strikes law saw illegal downloads decline, but record sales declined even more. I guess the question is that, is there any room at all for free stuff on the web? Because you as an artist at some point, and this is what the Creative Commons is very good at, the Lawrence Lessig and Aaron Schwartz project, you do want to give some stuff away free. There is a structure to protect it. Is there room for that at all, Eric?
Absolutely. I do think there is. File sharing in its core is a wonderful thing. David Byrne said something, though, that I think is pretty prescient. He said, when you share a file or a CD with your friend, that's actually sharing. But when you just upload entire catalogs of music, into a torrent site for free so that everyone can just take from them, that's almost like looting. That goes a little bit far. And if you look at actually the large uploaders of music on the torrent sites, usually it's only a few people. It might be in the hundreds that upload giant catalogs of music. If it's just peer-to-peer, person-to-person, hey, I like this record, they're talking, they're communicating, I don't have a problem with that. That's friendly file sharing. And I do think there always will be file sharing, and they should not be persecuting the young people, and it is mostly young people, because maybe they can't even afford the music. I've been there. When I was a kid, I spent most of my discretionary income, which wasn't very much, on records. And it did make me broke. I did get a lot of great music from it too. But I understand why people do it. But at the same time, we can't just create a culture of free stuff, because artists are sort of the canary in the coal mine. And I do agree, I really think that there is this sort of techno-gulag being created. And if you ever look at the history of like fascist takeovers, the first people to go are the dissidents and the artists. And when the artists can't make a living and they have to go, work as a barista or something other than their craft, you are suppressing art.
Okay, Eric Hilton, we're out of time. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll have you on again soon. Thanks for coming on Kaiser Report.
Thanks, Max. I'm going to continue to enjoy your show, and I'm part of the Silver Liberation Army.
Right on. All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Eric Hilton of Thievery Corporation. If you want to send me an email, please do so at kaiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all. Those are the two most hated companies. They do the most damage to the world. They're economically doing the most damage to the world, and they're run by people who are obviously in league with the devil.
Well, don't mention their name to a Vietnam vet, for example. I made the mistake of saying that name to my uncle who was in Vietnam. They don't like them. But, before the Supreme Court in this case, the Supreme Court justices did seem very favorable to Monsanto. And why in the world, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. asked, would anybody spend any money to try to improve the seed if as soon as they sold the first one, anybody could grow more and have as many of those seeds as they want?
Right, and of course you mentioned the Vietnam War in reference to the Agent Orange that they use to defoliate, and that's the primary of their business is to destroy agriculture. And if they can do so by patenting seeds and by gaming the intellectual property laws, then so much better. And of course, the other magical thinking that goes into Monsanto's mind is that when the seeds blow around thanks to the wind and they land on people's property, they then sue people for having seeds on their property that are patented by Monsanto that the wind blew there. So effectively, Monsanto is suing God. Their position is that God is a moron, according to Monsanto, which I guess is in keep.
Bowman versus Monsanto Company, number 11-796, was whether patent rights to seeds and other things that can replicate themselves extend beyond the first generation. The justices appeared alert to the consequences of their eventual ruling, not only for Monsanto's very lucrative soybean patents, but also for modern agriculture generally, and for areas as varied as vaccines, cell lines, and software.
Well, yeah, the patents for seeds that are owned by Monsanto are there for one purpose and one purpose only, to raise the cost of food. Just like you have central banks who are in the business of manipulating rates, interest rates, and money flows to raise the cost of agriculture in general for people by debasing currencies, there's Monsanto on the other side of this trade. They're the beneficiary of the debasement of currencies by monopolizing seed and cash crops and making it impossible for people to grow food and grow cash crops or agricultural products in ways that are economically efficient. So this is Monsanto adding to the gulagification of the global economy. I think they're the most hated company in the world, maybe Exxon or Monsanto. Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. Welcome to the Kaiser Report. Monsanto, Monsatan, evil genius or Frankenfood? Stacy?
Max Kaiser, Monsanto is in the news. There's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. About this case, the automaticearth.com says, time to stop Monsanto and the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the case is called Bowman versus Monsanto Company, and it's case number 11-796. And the New York Times, in their piece about this, and this is setting up the automaticearth.com writing about it, the Supreme Court appears to defend patent on soybean. The question in the case